Mm-hmm. All right. So, good afternoon or good morning to wherever you are. May peace and power elevation be to all of you. So, this your girl Tiffany coming through live in effect. And today we're going to be dealing with Black history. So, as I always do, I like to do daily Black history, look at the works of our ancestors, our people, and what they have contributed and what they have done in society and whatnot. Also, if you want to support this channel, make sure you go ahead and hit this right here, the $ tip world, right? If you want to support the channel and what I'm doing. Also, um, if you are on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you are on Facebook, go ahead and share the Facebook page or share the Facebook video. So today we're gonna be dealing with a topic about an individual who have um climbed up to the North Pole, right? And many people may not know about him because he's rarely talked about. But when it comes to the history, we know is an African American man that went up to the North Pole, but we never know enough information about him. And what's very interesting, he's related to someone who is an actress and who's pretty well known. So who am I talking about? I'm talking about Matthew Henson. So let me show you who Matthew Henson is. All right. So this is Matthew Henson. Okay. That's who he is. All right. So let me go ahead and let's share the history about Mr. Henson. Okay. All right. So the story of Matthew Henson. There you go. Okay. Matthew Alexander Henson was an American explorer who accompanied Robert Perry on 7 voyages to the Arctic over a period of nearly 23 years. They spent a total of 18 years on expeditions together. He is best known for his participation in the 1908 to 1909 expedition that claimed to have reached the geographic North Pole on April 6th of 1909. Henson said he was the first on their party to reach the pole. And it goes on to say Henson was born in Najamo or Najamo, Maryland, to sharecropper parents who were free Black Americans before the Civil War. He spent most of his early years in Washington, D.C., but left school at the age of 12 to work as a cabin boy. He later returned to Washington and worked as a sales clerk at a good department store. One of his customers was Robert Perry, who in 1887 hired him as a personal valet. At the time, Perry was working on the Niagara Canal. All right. Then it goes on to say their first Arctic expedition together in 1891 to 1892. Henson served as a navigator and craftsman and was known as Perry's first man. Like Perry, he studied Inuit survival techniques. Okay. It says during their 1908 and 1909 expedition to Greenland, Henson was one of the 6 men, including Perry and 4 Inuit assistants. who claimed to have been the first to reach the geographic North Pole. In interviews, Henson identified as the first member of the party to reach what they believed was the pole. Their claim had gained widespread acceptance, but in 1989, Wally Herbert published research that found that their expedition workers were unreliable, indicating that impossibly high speed during their final rush for the pole, and that the men could have fallen 30 to 60 miles short of the pole due to navigational errors. Okay. And then it goes on to say Henson achieved a degree of fame as a result of participating in the expedition. In 1912, he published a memoir titled A Negro Explorer at the North Pole. As he approached old age, his exploits received renewed attention. In 1937, he was the first African American to be made a life member of the Explorers Club. In 1948, he was elevated to the club's highest level of membership. And in 1944, Henson was awarded the Perry Polar Expedition Medal, and he was received at the White House by President Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower. In 1988, he and his wife were reinterred at Arlington National Cemetery. In 2000, Henson was posthumously awarded the Hubbard Medal by the National Geographic Society. All right, so as we can see here, so Henson happened to be one of the first to go on the expedition to travel to the North Pole. You know, so when we talk about science, especially blacks in science, his name should be brought up in the conversation. His name should be brought up only because he dealt with the Arctic, right, and dealt with the expedition. But let's see what more information we can get about him real quick. All right, so let's see what more information we can get about him. All right, now about his early life. Matthew's parent was subjected to attacks by the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist group who terrorized Southern freemen and former free people of color after the Civil War. All right, so and then it goes on to say to escape from racial violence in Southern Maryland in 1867, the Henson family sold the farm and moved to Georgetown, then still an independent town adjacent to the national capital. He had an older sister, S, born in 1864, and two younger sisters, Isa and S. Matthews' mother died when Matthews was 7. His father, Lemel, remarried to a woman named Caroline and had additional children with her, including daughters and a son. After his father died, Matthew was sent to live with his uncle who lived in Washington, D.C. Georgetown was made part of Washington, D.C. in 1871. The uncle paid a few years of education for Matthews, but soon died. Henson attended a black public school for the next 6 years, during the last of which he took a summer job washing dishes in a restaurant. His early years were marked by one especially memorable event. When he was 10 years old, he went to a ceremony honoring Abraham Lincoln, the American president who had fought so hard to preserve the Union during the Civil War and had issued a proclamation that had freed slaves in occupied Confederate states in 1863. At the ceremony, Matthews was greatly inspired by a speech given by Frederick Douglass, an escaped slave and renowned orator, the longtime leading figure in the American black community. Douglass called upon blacks to vigorously pursue educational opportunity and battle racial prejudice. All right. Then it goes on that at the age of 12, the youth made his way to Baltimore, Maryland, a busy port. He went to sea as a cabin boy on the merchant ship Katie's Hines, traveling to ports in China, Japan, Africa, and the Russian Arctic Sea. The ship leader's Captain Charles took Henson under his wing and taught him to read and write. All right, so let's go down to exploration. All right, that's him again. And that's him and some more people right here. Okay. So they was supposed to reach the North Pole. All right. And then furthermore, it goes on to say that Henson traded with Inuit and mastered their language. So what is the Inuit? Let's look up who the Inuits were. Okay, so the Inuit or the Injut. Okay, the Injut are a group of people culturally similar indigenous people inhabited the Arctic regions of Greenland, Canada, and Alaska. The Inuit languages are part of the Eskimo Aleut family. Inuit Sign Language is a critically endangered language isolated used in Nunavut. So the Inuit live throughout most of northern Canada in the territory of Nunavut and Nunavik in the northern third of Quebec. Nunatu was it Nunat Savut and Nunatu Kavut and Labrador in various parts of the Northwest Territories, particularly around the Arctic Ocean. The the in was it the Inuvialut settlements region, with the exception of the Nunatu Kavut. These areas are known in the Inuit languages as Inuit Nunangat in Canada. Section 25 and 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982 classify Inuit as a distinctive group of the Aboriginal Canadians who are not included under either the First Nations or the Métis. All right, so pretty much Matthew Henson, as he traveled on his journey, right, to go close to the Arctic, he ran into a indigenous group called the Inuit people, and he learned their language. He learned how to survive by being around these individuals. Now, so he was pretty profound. He was intelligent enough to seek out and learn about the environment and how to be able to live in a cold climate. And he put himself up for a real challenge. I can tell you that. All right, so let's go ahead and go back. And it says they call him Mari Paluk. Mari Paluk. He was remembered as the only non in Jute who became skilled in driving the dog sheds and in training dog teams in a in Jute way. He was a skilled craftsman, often coming up with solution for what the team needed in the harsh Arctic condition. They learned to build igloos out of snow for mobile housing as they travel. His and Perry's team covered thousands of miles in a dog sled and reached the farthest north point of any Arctic expedition until 1909. Whoo, sheesh. I wonder what was the temperature like. I'm curious. What was the temperature? Okay, in 1909, Perry mounted his eighth attempt to reach the North Pole. The expedition was large, as Perry planned to use his system of sending up clutch supplies along the way. When he and Henson boarded his ship, Roosevelt, leaving Greenland on August 18, 1909, they were accompanied by 22 Inuit men, 17 Inuit women, 10 children, 246 dogs, and 70 tons, 64 metric tons of whale meat from Labrador, the meat and blubber of 50 walruses, hunting equipment, and tons of coal. In February, Henson and Perry departed their anchor ship at Ellesmere Islands, Cape Sheridan, with the Inuit men and 130 dogs working to lay a trail and supplies along the route to the pole. It says Perry selected Henson and Ford and Jew as part of the team of 6 men who would make the final run to the pole before the goal was reached. Perry could no longer continue on foot and rode in a dog sled. Various accounts said he was ill, exhausted, or had frozen toes. Oh my goodness. And he sent Henson ahead as a scout. Okay. In a newspaper interview, Henson later said, I was in the lead that had overshot the mark a couple of miles. We went back, then I could see that my footprints were the first at the spot. Henson proceeded to plant the American flag. The claims by Perry's team to have reached the North Pole was widely debated in newspaper at the time, as was competing claim by Frederick Cook, the National Geographic Society as well. The Naval Affairs subcommittees of the U.S. House of Representatives both credit Perry's team with having reached the North Pole. Others remain doubtful. A reassessment of Perry's notebook by British polar explorer Wally Herbert in 1988 found it lacking in accessional data, thus renewing doubts about Perry's claims. Okay. So now, let's look at his later life. All right, so this is him right here. He looked very handsome. Photograph of Henson in civilian clothing taken from his 1912 book, A Negro Explorer at the North Pole. Okay. So it says in 1912, Henson published a memoir about his Arctic exploration, A Negro Explorer at the North Pole. In this, he described himself as a general assistant, skilled craftsperson, interpreter he had learned in Inuit language, and laborer. He later collaborated with author Bradley Robinson in his 1947 biography, Dark Companion, which he told more about his life. During the following decades, Admiral Perry received many honors for leading the expedition to the pole, but Henson's contributions were largely ignored. In 1909, he was honored at dinners with the black community. Henson spent most of the next 30 years working on staff in the U.S. Custom House in New York at the suggestion of Theodore Roosevelt. He later gained renewed attention in 1937. Henson was admitted as a member to the prestigious Explorers Club in New York City and made an honorary member in 1948, of whom there are only 20 per year. In 1944, Congress awarded him and five other Perry aides duplicates of the Perry Polar Expedition Medal, a civil medal given to Perry. President Truman and Eisenhower both honored Henson before he died in 1955. So Henson died in the Bronx on March the 9th of 1955 at the age of 88. He was buried at Woodlawn Cemetery and survived by his wife Lucy. After her death in 1968, she was buried with him in 1988. Both their bodies were moved for reinterment at Arlington National Cemetery, accompanied by commemoration ceremony. All right. Okay, then so let's okay, so you know what? Let's go ahead and read a little bit about his family life. All right. And it says Henson married Eva Flint in 1891, but their marriage did not survive their long periods of separation, and they divorced in 1897. He later married Lucy Ross in November. In New York City on September 7th, 1907. They had no children. Now, it goes on to say during the extended expedition to Greenland, Henson and Perry both took injured women as country wives and fathered children with them. Henson concubine known as Akatiwa Akatiwa fathered his only child, a son named Anuka, or was it Anuka? Yeah, Anuka, born in 1906. Anuka's children are Henson's only descendants. After 1909, Henson never saw Atu, Antigua or his son again. Other explorers sometimes updated him about them. The existence of Henson and Perry's descendant was first made public by French explorer and ethnologist Jean Mallory, who spent a year in Greenland in 1951 to 1952. All right. So then it goes on to say that Ellen Counter, a neuroscientist and director of Harvard Foundation, had been long in interest in Henson's story and traveled in Greenland for research related to it. Learning of possible descendants of the explorer in 1986, he tracked down Henson and Perry's sons, Anuka and Kali, respectively. By then, the men were ontogenerants. Autogenerants. I never heard that term. Autogenerants. He arranged a visit for them following year to the United States, where they met American relatives from both families and visit their father's graves. Uh, Anuka died in 1987. He and his wife Avak had five sons and a daughter who have children of their own. While some still reside in Greenland, others have moved to Sweden or the United States. And it says several injured family members returned to Washington, D.C. in 1988 for the ceremony of reinterment of Henson and his wife Lucy and Arlington National Cemetery. Counter had petitioned President Ronald Reagan for this honor to gain recognition of Henson's contribution to the Arctic exploration. Counter wrote a book about his findings, Anunnaki and Kali, his research on Henson's life and contribution. It goes in historical racial relations and the in Jude's meeting with Henson and Perry's relatives in the United States, entitled North Pole Legacy: Black, White, and Eskimo. The material was also adapted and produced as a film documentary by the same name. Now, as you guys know, that Taraji Henson, right, the actress, she is supposed to be related to Matthew Henson. That's supposed to be her if I'm not mistaken, that's supposed to be like her great 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 uncle. On here it says Henson is believed to be a brother of the great great grandfather of actress Taraji P. Henson. So he's supposed to be like her great great uncle. That's who he's supposed to be. So they some kin to each other. But you know what? Let's go ahead and let's look further on to this information about him. All right. Okay, so all right. So now I'm on google.com, and what I'm reading is Daily News March 17th. I mean, well, it was on May 17, 1992. It's called, yeah, the newspaper is called Daily News, and it says the descendant of black man and Eskimo woman are unique. Ooh. Okay, so it says in a tiny village 1,000 miles north of Arctic Circle, Harvard University neuroscientist Alan Counter stared into the face of an Asian Eskimo man who, strangely enough, seemed to know him. Ooh, I don't know. Okay, I don't like this. It says Counter had traveled to North Greenland to check out rumors that Matthew Henson, a black explorer who traveled to the North Pole with Robert E. Pearly, had fathered children with an Eskimo woman. Counter, also black, had a long life interest in Henson, who he believed had been denied his rightful place in history. It says, now to Counter's great amazement, the 80-year-old Anunnaki was not surprised to meet him. You must be a Henson, he said, and you come to find me. That meeting led to a series of events that brought belated national recognition to Matthew Henson and drew together Henson's descendants, both American and Eskimo. The story of how Counter discovered Henson Eskimo's descendant and those Perry is told in Counter's recently published book, a television documentary that premiered on the Monitor channel and will be rebroadcast March 30th and again in April. All right. And it says North Pole Legacy: Black, White, and Eskimo, published by University of Massachusetts Press, is Counter's story of how he tracked down Henson and Perry descendants and brought them to the United States to meet their relatives. It also tells of his success efforts to get Henson's body reburied next to Perry's in Arlington National Cemetery. So, and then it also goes into the Monitor documentary North Pole Legacy, called from film and documents provided by Counter, also delves into 18-year-old 18-year struggle by Perry and Henson to reach the North Pole and the unusual friendship that developed between the two. Arthur Alice Haley's was the show's host. He died 4 days after the final shooting was complete. It's a modern day detective story, a tinge of adventure, said Robert Glover, co-producer of the documentary. Um, It says for Perry to bring Henson, a black man, to the North Pole was an astonishing step in 1909, the year they had, and four Eskimo companions finally made it there. For Perry to rely so heavily on a black person at that time was phenomenal, Glover said. Both the book and documentary focus on the lives of the two men's offsprings, Perry's sons and Kali and Henson's son Anukat, who never gave up hope that someday he would meet his father's relatives. It says counter president of the Harvard Foundation said his efforts began after colleagues in Stockholm, Sweden, told him of rumors there were dark-skinned Eskimos in Greenland who might be descendants of Henson and others of light complexion who might be descendants of Perry. All right, so that's the story about Henson and his descendant. Okay, so let's look up some more information. Right here, here's the article, and it's on jaster.org. It's called the Travail of Matthew Henson, and it's written by Ward McAfee. The Travail of Matthew Henson. The news of September 11, 1909, that Commander Robert E. Perry had conquered the North Pole also told that four Eskimos and Matthew Henson, Negro Americans, shared in the triumph. Perry's selection of the Eskimos was understandable, for they were expert dog sledders and adapted to survival in their frozen environment. The choice of Henson as Perry's chief assistant was a different matter. Why many contemporary Americans wonder had not a Caucasian served in Henson's place. And it says, today, with the blossoming of Black history, Matthew Henson accomplished have become better known, yet strangely the furrow raised at the time by Henson's presence at the pole had been completely forgotten. From a social historian point of view, the story of white America's racist response to the discovery is the most interesting aspect of it all. In it, one can find evidence of racism in one of its most pernicious form. It is understandable that this should be so, for American society at the turn of the century was blindly nurturing a theory of racial preference, the consequences of which would be borne by future generation Jim Crow, lynching, and systematic encouragement of hopelessness in Negroes were reaching new extremes. In this social context, Robert E. Perry discovered the North Pole. All right. So let's go ahead and go further down. Okay, so and then it goes down to say there were many real valid reasons for selection of Henson, which had nothing. Give me a second. All right. Okay, getting back to where I was staying. All right, so what was I at? All right, it says there were many real valid reasons for the selection of Henson, which had nothing to do with his racial inheritance. For one, each of Perry's white assistants had certain deficiencies, which made them poor candidates for the hazardous final dash. Badly frozen feet determined that both McMillan and Marvin turned back. Burrow, young and inexperienced, was no rival for the honor ultimately won by Henson. That left Burlett, who was the last man to leave the expedition before the final leg of the journey. He was in good health when ordered to head south. He was also a leader on the expedition and received accolades second only to Perry upon the successful completion of the exploration. Hence, Perry's justification of selecting Henson always brought up Bartlett's name. The commander stressed two reasons for his refusal to choose Bartlett for the honor. First, Bartlett was the skipper of the ship that had brought the expedition to the Arctic, and his skills of steering the vessel out through the pack ice could not be risked on the last dangerous push to the to the pole. Second, Bartlett was a Canadian, a British subject. Wow. Perry, once described by a national magazine as intensely patriotic, had told scores of audience that our flag should be the first to float at the North Pole. It seems to me appropriate. Perry wrote in one of his first messages to the American people upon his return from the pole, in view of the magnificent British record of Arctic works covering 3 centuries, that it should be a British subject who could boast that, next to an American, he had been nearest to the pole. Mm. And it also says some Americans became fascinated with yet another possible explanation. Just as Perry did not want to share his conquest with a foreigner, perhaps he chose Henson so that he would not have to share honors with a white man. One early commentator, while critical of Perry in other regards, accepted the commander's choice of Henson and recognized as just that the leader and inspirer of it all should have the glory. His words the risk, then why not his the honor? So with bitter disappointment perhaps, yet with unquestioning obedience to orders, the faithful companions of Perry stopped one by one with a few days' march of the pole and let him go ahead with his one swarthy companion. In other words, Henson was no rival to Perry because of his racial status, and thus was selected on racial grounds. More than any other, this explanation interested representatives making a congressional committee investigating Perry's claim under hard questioning. Perry did not directly admit the validity of the rumor, stating ambiguously that he had spent his lifetime for his goal and had not wanted to share the glory of his discovery with Bartlett. Macon pressed him. He had not Columbus, Mulligan, and De Soto taken other white men with them on their exploration, yet nobody shared the glory of their discoveries. All that Perry could reply was that what he said reply was that had he taken Bartlett, sharing the honors would have been inevitable under the conditions. Once his way of reasoning is accepting the San Francisco Bulletin editorialized, we shall have to look upon Perry as the white and Matt Henson, his companion, as the color polar champion. And then the whole affair would be cheapened and future generation would not care a gumdrop who discovered the pole. Perhaps Perry wished to have his achievement remembered in the words of one contemporary magazine as made by one white man with a white man expedition. Hmm. And then goes on to say, while the significance of the episode rests not in the discovery of Perry's beliefs, but rather as a lightning rod of white supremacist thought patterns in the early 20th century America, the personal aspect of the story is intriguing in its tragic dimension. Perry had shared hardships and triumphs with Henson for over 20 years. Both men truly liked each other as is clear to a reader of their memoirs, yet Perry's society emphasized racial reason for their successful partnership. A union all the more tragic if one accepts a statement made by Perry in 1910 as genuine. I wish to give Henson some return for his many years of faithful service to me, and this was the best thing I had to give him. All right. So this is the article right here, and it's called the Travail of Matthew Henson. All you gotta do is look it up. It's on jastor.org, JSTOR.org. Okay. So there has been criticism as to, from white America, why did you, they asked Perry, who happened to be a white man, right? Robert E. Perry. They asked him, why did you choose a black man? Well, he says, well, because all the other guys, they weren't qualified. And there was one particular white guy, but he was British. And no, he was Canadian, but he was under British rule. So he wouldn't be qualified either, because I would not want to stand next to a Canadian slash a British man, and he gets all the title as a British person. So if it's gonna be somebody that's American, let it be somebody that's American that's qualified. And none of my American white friends are qualified to do this work. So therefore I took the black man on with me, because Negro, because he was more qualified and he knew how to do the work, and he was able to get up on that Arctic and go on the North Pole. But at the end of the day, it seemed like more of the credit was given to Perry, right? Because it was his expedition, but it was Matthew Henson that did most of the work, that showed him the route, and that helped him to get to that discovery, that even took him to the Injute people, and exposed him to learning the language or whatnot. And not only that, exposed him to learn about survival in the Arctic. Now, anybody that knows about the Arctic, is a very cold region. It's not somewhere that you really want to live. If you cannot survive, if you think the cold weather is bad, living in New York or living in Ohio or even the Illinois, try living in the Arctic. If you try to live in the Arctic, you gotta adapt to that cold weather. If you can't adapt to it, then you may not want to even go there. Wow. But I could say that this man that had an amazing journey, 20 years dealing with cold condition, 20 years. Mm. And then he learned the language, which is also very amazing as well. So that's that information. And let's see what else we can find. Okay, what more can we find? So here it is. It's called Arctic Profiles. Matthew A. Henson, the year that he was born, the year that he died. All right, so let's see. What else can we find on here? Mm-hmm. All right, so let's see what other information we can find on Mr. Henson. I'm trying to see. Okay, so right here, it says that Henson selected the field teams, choosing the best and strongest Eskimo hunters. So Matthew Henson chose some Eskimo hunters because they were familiar with the region and the area. And by the fact that they were being familiar with that area, they could show them the routes. Okay. And it goes down here, say the plan to use Fort Conger had tragic result. While still aboard ship, Perry party was visited by Sir, Sir was it Sir Sir who admitted he too was aiming for Fort Conger. It was the dead of the winter, the worst possible time to travel the 250 miles to the fort. Matthew argued that Sir Verger could not possibly reach this objective before spring. Perry stubbornly refused to listen. Reluctantly, Matt organized 4 teams and they set out for the Fort Conger. All right. And it also goes down and said by February the weather improved, and with Perry lashed to the sledge, Henson led the party south on the 11-day trek to the ship. The surgeon aboard the Windward immediately amputated all of Perry's toe. Tragic as it was, this blow did not diminish Perry's burning ambition to discover the pole. Matthew Henson now became more indispensable than ever. His strength, courage, and field experience suited him to the pole of leader, and there was no other man Perry could trust as he could Matt. But a new method of travel for Perry had to be worked out. No longer able to walk behind the sledge, he would have to ride, which he had never been allowed. To preserve his pride and dignity, Perry would be the first man out of camp, shuffling slowly, and when the others had passed, he would climb aboard the last sledge. All right. Let's see what else. It says on the next to last march of the successful expedition, Henson knew at the outset how far the last day journey would be, and his experience told him how many hours it would take to travel that distance. The sun was his clock. Wow, the sun was his clock. That's interesting. Slighting the position of the sun as he started that final advance on April 6th of 1909, Matt knew where it would be when he had reached to the pole. Thus, it was that he arrived 45 minutes before Perry, who, after taking an instrument sighting, said, "This is it, the pole at last." Mhm. Upon their return to America in the public controversy brought on by Dr. Frederick A. Cooks, I already read that part earlier. Um, okay, so right here it says understood Perry's total dependence on Matt. He never would have reached the pole without Henson. He later wrote, Matt was more real value than the combined services of all of us. With years of experience, an expert dog driver, a master mechanic, physically strong, most popular with the Eskimos, talking the language like a native, clean, full of greets, he went to the pole because Perry couldn't get along without him. Mm. Back in the States, Matt drifted into semi-obscurity. In 1913, President Taft appointed him into a civil service job as a messenger boy at the New York Custom House. Over the ensuing years, as many as 6 bills were introduced in Congress to retire Matt with honor and pension, but all failed. So here it is. This white man, Robert Perry, admitted that he could have not done the expedition without Matthew, who was very mentally strong, physically strong, and very intellectual, and knew how to be able to speak the language of a foreign language of those in the native land, and had a connection and relationship, good relation with those people. He would have not ever got to the North Pole. So if you ever wonder why that United States flag is on that North Pole, thanks to Matthew Henson. If it wasn't for Matthew Henson, you would not see that United States flag on that North Pole. And then you would not know anything about the Arctic. You would not have known anything about that colder climate. So give thanks to that ancestor. All right. So you guys, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and log off this video. But I thank you guys for watching. So if you want to go ahead and share my video, you are more than welcome to do so. If you are on YouTube, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And if you like what I'm doing, you know what to do. You can hit that Cash App, $Tip World. Other than that, you guys have a wonderful day, a wonderful afternoon. Please be safe out there. Take it easy on yourself, and do not get caught slipping. All right. Be safe. This is your girl Tiffany, and I'm out, and I will come back later on today. All right. Peace. If not later on today, maybe some other day. But all right. Y'all have a good one. Peace.